The Prisoner and the Guard. The prison floated in the darkness of space like a cold, forgotten rock. Built inside a hollow moon, it was known across the galaxy as Cell Block Omega, a place where hope didn't exist. And deep inside it, in the lowest level, sat a prisoner no one wanted to talk about. His name was Cal. He wasn't human. He was Zarnak, a tall, silver-skinned alien with dark eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. To most people in the prison, he was a killer, a war criminal, a monster. But he didn't speak. He didn't scream. He only waited, because in 3 days, he was going to die. Lieutenant Mara Hale. Lieutenant Mara Hale had worked in Cell Block Omega for 4 years. She followed every rule. She didn't speak to prisoners. She didn't ask questions. Until Cale. Every day, she brought food to his cell. Every day, he nodded quietly. He never begged, never asked for more. Most guards avoided him. He's the reason the Vesta station fell, they whispered. He killed over 100 in 1 day. But Mara kept watching him. He didn't look like a killer. He looked tired, like someone who had already given up. A whisper in the dark. One night, Mara was doing rounds. She stopped outside Cal's cell, as usual. He sat on the floor, hands chained, eyes closed. Then, he spoke. I didn't kill them. Mara froze. It was the first time she had ever heard his voice. She looked through the glass. Cal opened his eyes. Calm. Quiet. I tried to stop it. Mara stepped closer. Why say this now? Because, he said, I thought I could accept death. But not like this. Not for something I didn't do. Mara's hand tightened around her tablet. She knew she wasn't supposed to answer. But something inside her whispered, listen. The file that didn't match. That night, Mara broke a rule. She logged into the private archives. Searched Cal's case file. Charge. Mass murder. Evidence. Explosion logs. Missing bodies, survivor reports. But something felt wrong. The report said Cal was the only survivor on the alien side. Yet, there were no camera feeds, no audio, no direct witness. Just assumptions. She searched deeper. Then, she found something strange. A deleted surveillance file. She clicked. The truth begins to show. The footage showed the battle at Vesta Station. Explosions, screams, fire, and then, Cal. He wasn't attacking. He was pulling humans behind a shield, covering them. He fought against his own kind to protect civilians. Mara sat back in her chair, stunned. He saved people, but the report blamed him. Someone had lied. Someone powerful. The decision. Mara returned to Cal's cell the next day. She didn't bring food this time. Cal looked up. You saw it, he said quietly. Mara nodded. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked. No one would believe me, he replied. They saw my face. That was enough. Mara stared at him. The chains on his hands, the burn mark on his chest, and the sadness in his eyes. He was ready to die. Not because he was guilty, but because he believed no one cared. Until now. A spark of rebellion. As Mara walked back to her room, the prison's loudspeaker echoed. Execution scheduled in 48 hours. All staff prepare for standard procedure. She stopped walking. Her mind raced. She had 2 options. Stay quiet and watch an innocent being die. Break the rules. Risk her life. And set him free. She looked back at the dark hallway. Something inside her had already chosen. Ending hook. That night, Mara opened a hidden locker in her room. Inside was a stolen keycard, a map of the prison's lower tunnels, and a single sentence written in bold red letters. Trust no one. She looked at the countdown on her screen. 47 hours, 59 minutes, and whispered to herself, hang on, Cal. I'm not letting you die for something you didn't do. The secret recording. The prison moon was quiet. Too quiet. Lieutenant Mara Hale walked through the steel halls, heart racing. She had broken the rules once by watching the hidden footage. Now she was about to do something worse. Download it. Inside the archives, the prison's archive room was dark, locked behind 3 security doors. Only senior officers had access. Mara had stolen a passcode from her commander's tablet. It was risky, but if she didn't act soon, Cale would be gone forever. She entered the room, found the terminal, and typed fast. The old surveillance footage appeared. It played again. Cale shielding civilians. Cale pushing one of his own people away. Cale dragging the wounded human into cover. And then, the explosion. Mara stared, jaw tight. He didn't cause it. He prevented more deaths. But someone had cut this from the official file. The face in the shadows. She paused the video. In the background, just before the blast, a human officer appeared, high-ranking and strangely calm. Mara zoomed in. Commander Rin, her own superior. Her stomach dropped. He was supposed to be off station during the attack, but here he was, watching the chaos unfold, smiling. The setup. Mara downloaded the video to a private drive and left quickly. Her hands were shaking. Cale was innocent, and Commander Rin had let it happen. Why? To start the war. To cover something up. Mara didn't know, but she knew this. Cale was a scapegoat, and if she told the truth, she'd be next. The return to the cell. That night, Mara returned to Cale's cell. No food tray, no clipboard, just a look of quiet purpose. Cale stood slowly, sensing something had changed. "You saw him," he said. Mara nodded. "You saved people," she said. "Someone erased it. My commander was there." He knew. Cale sat down. "They needed someone to blame," he said softly. "I was different. Easy." Mara lowered her voice. "They're going to kill you in less than 2 days." Cale looked away. "Then let them." "No," she said. "Not anymore." A plan is born. In her room, Mara pulled up the prison's power grid map. There was a weakness, a 3-minute blackout cycle during system checks. Enough time to override a door. She messaged an old friend in the supply docks. "Need you. One favor. No questions." Then she opened a hidden compartment in her wall. Inside, a small bag of supplies, and her old emergency escape plan, one she never thought she'd use. Until now. Whispers in the dark. Back in his cell, Cale closed his eyes and reached into memory. He remembered the fire, the human screaming, his own kind attacking, and the child he pulled from the smoke, the girl with brown eyes, clinging to his neck. He had tried to save her, but in the report, she never existed. He didn't even know if she lived. But tonight, someone believed him. For the first time in years, he felt something warm in his chest. Hope. The system knows. Meanwhile, deep in the control tower, a system alert pinged. Unauthorized access detected. Archive terminal. Commander Rin narrowed his eyes. "Find out who accessed the Vesta files," he ordered, "and check on the prisoner." Ending hook. Mara sat in the dark, staring at the hidden drive. The only copy of the truth. Her door beeped. A voice whispered, "Lieutenant Hale, report to command." Now, her heart skipped. They knew. She grabbed the drive, hid it in her boot, and walked out. Behind her, the words she had written earlier on her wall flickered in red. Trust no one. The escape plan. The alarms didn't ring yet, but Mara Hale knew it was only a matter of time. She had the truth. She had the evidence. But now, she had to act, because they were coming for her. The final countdown begins. Inside the prison's command center, Commander Rin stared at a blinking report. Unauthorized archive access traced to Lieutenant Mara Hale. He didn't hesitate. Lock her quarters. Search everything. Bring her in, quietly. A silent team moved. But Mara was already gone. A friend in the shadows. In the dim cargo docks, Mara found Kellis, an old supply tech she once saved during a pirate attack. He looked nervous. You said one favor. Mara handed him a small chip. Access this shuttle. No ID tags. I'll bring the cargo. He looked over her shoulder. This about the alien. She didn't answer. That was enough for him to nod. 10 minutes. Don't be late. The cell block breach. Back at the lower levels, Mara approached Cal's cell in full uniform. The guard at the door barely looked up. Order from command, she said flatly. Prisoner transfer. The guard frowned. No one's scheduled. She moved fast. A stun blast to his neck. He dropped instantly. She scanned her keycard and opened the door. Cal stood, not surprised. Is this real? He asked. Mara tossed him a cloak. No time for questions. We move now. Tension in the tunnels. They moved fast through the underground service tunnels, places Mara memorized over years of patrols. Cal stayed quiet, watching her. This was the first time he'd left that cell in 6 months. Why are you doing this? He asked. You didn't deserve what they did to you, she said. He looked at her. And what happens to you? Mara hesitated. Doesn't matter. The blockade. At the docking bay, things went wrong. 2 guards stood by the launch platform. One of them recognized her. Hail. Mara raised her blaster. Don't move. The other guard reached for his comm. Cal moved like lightning. He struck the guard with a single punch, just enough to knock him out, not kill. Mara stared. You could have killed him. Cal shrugged. I'm not who they said I am. The escape. The shuttle engines roared to life. Kellis gave them a quick nod and slammed the cargo hatch closed. 30 seconds, and I launch. Go. Inside, Mara strapped in. Cal looked out the viewport as the prison moon grew smaller. You just became a traitor, he said. I already was, she replied. The moment I saw the truth. The alarm finally sounds. Back on the prison station, alarms finally screamed. Shuttle 47 unauthorized launch. Level 9 prisoner missing. Lieutenant Hale missing. Commander Rin's face turned red with fury. Track that shuttle. Lock all escape routes. And bring me Hale, alive. In open space, the shuttle jumped to light speed. For now, they were free. But the galaxy was watching. And the real chase had just begun. Cal sat quietly beside her. His wrists still bore scars from the chains. Mara reached into her boot and pulled out the data chip. The truth is on here. Cal looked at her. I never expected a human would be the one to save me. She replied softly. I never expected the enemy to be innocent. Enemies on the run. The stars rushed past the windows as the shuttle moved through hyperspace, but Mara couldn't breathe easy. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a fugitive, and sitting beside her was the alien the galaxy still called a killer. A broken transmission. Mara pulled up her ship's communication relay. Any news? Cal asked. She nodded toward the console. Someone tried to jam our signal. They know we're out here. She had tried to send the truth, the full video of the Vesta Station attack. But it didn't go through. Someone high up is still covering it up, Mara whispered. Cal's eyes narrowed. They'd rather protect the lie than admit they executed the wrong side. Nowhere is safe. They landed on Arcos 6, a forgotten scrapyard world full of old ships, smugglers, and outlaws. Mara and Cal changed clothes, moved quietly. But even in a place like this, wanted posters flickered on the walls. Wanted. Lieutenant Mara Hale, traitor to Earth Command. Wanted. Cal, high-level alien combatant. Mara pulled her hood lower. I used to chase criminals, she muttered. Now I am one. Cal gave a faint smile. Now you understand what it feels like. a price on their heads. At a shady bar, they met a contact, Salin, a slicer who could decrypt the corrupted part of the black box data chip. He stared at them both, nervous. "You know there's a bounty on your heads, right? Half the galaxy wants to cash you in." Mara placed a credit stick on the table. "We don't care. We just want the truth out." Salin nodded. "It'll take a few hours." But they didn't have hours. The bounty hunters arrive. Sith, the slicer, looked up. Too late. Through the window, 3 bounty hunters stepped into the street. Armored, armed, and scanning. Mara grabbed Cal's hand. "Move. Now." They slipped out the back, running through alleys filled with broken droids and leaking pipes. Shots rang out behind them. Cal pushed Mara behind cover. "Go," she shouted. But Cal didn't run. He turned and faced the hunters. Cal's real power. One of the bounty hunters fired. Cal raised his hands. A glowing energy shield pulsed from his palms, catching the blast and sending it backward, knocking the hunter off his feet. Mara stared. "You never used that before." Cal breathed hard. "I didn't want to prove them right." The escape and the choice. They reached an old cargo freighter parked deep in the scrapyard. Mara fired up the engines. Cal leaned against the wall, breathing heavy. She turned to him. "You saved me back there. You didn't have to." Cal looked up, voice low. "You believed in me when I didn't." The truth almost lost. As the ship lifted off, they saw Salin running toward them, with the decrypted data drive in hand. He threw it through the hatch just before blaster fire hit him in the back. Mara caught the drive and screamed. "No." Cal pulled her back into the ship. "We have to go." She nodded, tears in her eyes. She didn't know the slicer, but he had believed in their cause. And now he was gone. The final line. In the safety of orbit, Mara played the decrypted footage. It was all there now. Cal saving civilians. The real enemy firing the explosive. Commander Rin watching and doing nothing. Mara whispered, "We can show the galaxy now." Cal stared out the window. "Then let's wake them up." The lost ship. The decrypted footage was real. Too real. Cal and Mara had the proof now. The video showed everything. But one final piece was still missing. The original mission logs from the destroyed human ship where the lie had started. And that ship was still floating in dead space, a graveyard in the stars. They followed the star map left by the slicer before he died. It led them to a gray, silent debris field, far beyond the trade lanes. Floating at the center was a wrecked ship, its name barely visible on the hull. ESS Vesta. The place where Cal had been captured. The place where everything went wrong. Ghosts and memories. As they docked and stepped inside, Mara felt a chill. The lights flickered. Walls were burned. Signs of battle remained, scorch marks, melted steel, and dried blood. Cal walked slowly through the halls, remembering every step. "I pulled them through here," he said. 5 of them. One was a child. Mara watched him. "You saved them, but Earth Command said you killed them." Cal nodded. They needed a reason to keep the war going. The hidden room. They reached the captain's quarters. Inside, a shattered terminal, but still connected to the black box in the ship's core. Mara powered it up. The system flickered, and a voice echoed. "Captain Linara, final report. We were ambushed, not by Zarnak forces, but by rogue Earth agents. Cal, the Zarnak warrior, protected us. This is a lie. I won't be part of it." Mara froze. The captain herself had spoken the truth, and no one ever heard it. Cal sat down, quietly. "She believed me." Mara whispered, "They must have killed her after this recording. A sudden trap." The moment the message finished playing, Mara's console lit up red. A silent beacon had been triggered. "This ship was booby-trapped," she gasped. "Someone didn't want us finding this." Cal's eyes narrowed. Someone's coming. Outside the window, a black military vessel appeared. No flags, no IDs, just guns. A fight they can't win. The enemy ship launched a boarding party. Mara locked the door. We can't fight them head-on. Kale opened a hidden panel in the wall. An old escape route only crew would know. We run. Again. Mara hesitated. We can't keep running forever. Kale looked at her, calm and firm. No. After this, we don't run. The captain's last gift. Before leaving, Mara grabbed the full log archive from the black box. Kale paused and placed his hand on the captain's nameplate. Thank you, he whispered. They slipped through the emergency shaft as explosions rocked the ship behind them. A narrow escape. Back on their own vessel, Mara sent the full logs to a neutral media satellite, the kind that couldn't be easily silenced. Within minutes, the data was spreading. Across planets, across systems. Not just proof of Cal's innocence, but proof that Earth Command had framed him. The galaxy starts to stir. Protests began on human worlds. Zarnak leaders demanded answers, and other alien races started asking, if Cal was innocent, how many others were too? A storm was coming, and Cal was no longer its victim. The turning point. Cal looked out the viewport, his voice quiet. For years I was ready to die. He looked at Mara. But now, I want to live. Not just for me. For everyone who was silenced. Mara nodded. We're not just fugitives anymore. We're the spark, the broadcast. The stars were watching. So was the galaxy. Kale stood at the center of the ship's command deck, the light from distant suns reflecting off his silver skin. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired, but clear. It was time. A message no one could silence. Mara stood beside him. She had connected the ship's main console to 12 neutral relay beacons across systems. Once the signal began, it would go everywhere. No government could stop it. She looked at Kale. Are you ready? He didn't nod. He simply stepped forward and began to speak. Cal's voice reaches the stars. My name is Cal. I am Zarnak. Years ago, I was called a monster, a killer, a war criminal. But that was a lie. Images appeared on screens. Kale shielding civilians at Vesta Station. The real attackers. Commander Rin watching, doing nothing. The captain's final log. I was ready to be executed for crimes I never committed. I stayed silent because I believed no one would listen. But one human did. The camera shifted slightly to show Mara beside him. She saw the truth. She helped me escape, not because she trusted me, but because she believed that truth still mattered. A galaxy reacts. On Earth, civilians watched in stunned silence. A young girl whispered, "He doesn't look like a monster." On Zarnak colonies, warriors lowered their weapons. A veteran blinked back tears. He lived. In the halls of power, some panicked. Others listened. And others prepared for war. Cal's challenge. This message is not to seek revenge. It is to ask one question. How many others were silenced like me? How many more will suffer if we stay quiet? I don't want a war. I want truth. I want peace. But if we must fight for it, we will. His final words echoed. I was ready to die. But now, because of her, I choose to live. And I choose to speak. Earth Command responds. Back on Earth, Commander Rin watched with fury. Shut it down, he barked. An officer replied, Sir, it's too late. The signal's everywhere. Rin slammed his fist on the console. We need to stop him before he becomes a symbol. A new identity. Later, aboard their ship, Mara placed a hand on Cal's shoulder. You did it, she said. They heard you. Cal stared out at the stars. They're listening now, but they still fear me. Mara smiled softly. Let them fear the truth. A spark across stars. Messages flooded in. A group of human veterans offered protection. Zarnak elders invited Kel to speak in front of their council. Neutral systems asked for peace talks, for the first time in years. The tide was turning. But so was the danger. One final threat. A hidden transmission reached their ship. No ID, no trace. It played only one sentence. "You're not done, Kel. You were never the only one." Static. Then silence. Mara frowned. "What does that mean?" Kel looked into the dark beyond their ship. "I think the real fight is just beginning." From scapegoat to symbol, the galaxy had hurt him. Some believed, some doubted, but no one could ignore him anymore. Kel, once a nameless prisoner, was now a name carried across stars. But with fame came danger. A divided galaxy. Across systems, protests erupted. Human cities demanded justice. Zarnak warriors called for peace talks. But others wanted blood. A rogue military faction from Earth, led by Commander Rin, launched a bounty. Kel must be silenced. Anyone protecting him is a traitor. The meeting that changed everything. In a neutral zone, aboard a massive orbital station, a secret meeting was arranged. Zarnak elders, human diplomats. And in the middle, Kel and Mara Hale. Mara stood tall, once a soldier, now a symbol of truth. The room was tense. Old wounds ran deep. Some wanted war. Then Kel spoke. "I was ready to be executed. I had accepted it, because I thought no one would ever see me as anything but a monster." He looked around the room. But one person changed that. She didn't see a killer. She saw a person. "And now I ask you to do the same, not just for me, but for all those who were judged before they could speak." Silence. Then one of the Zarnak elders stood. Let him speak before the Grand Council. The attempt to kill hope. But before Kel could leave the station, an explosion shook the outer ring. An elite strike team, loyal to Commander Rin, had infiltrated the station. "Kill the Zarnak," one shouted. "End the broadcast." Mara and Kel ran through the smoke and fire. People screamed. Guards fought. Diplomats took cover. Kel could have escaped. But instead, he turned back. The choice that changed everything. In the middle of the chaos, a human child was trapped under falling debris. Kel rushed forward, lifting the beam, shielding the child with his body as more rubble fell. Cameras caught everything. This time, he wasn't a mystery. He was the hero, on every screen. After the fire, the attack failed. Kel was wounded but alive. The child survived. And the galaxy had seen it live. No editing, no lies, just truth. The council votes. Days later, a galactic council gathered. Their decision shocked the systems. Kel was cleared of all charges. Mara Hale was honored as a protector of truth. And for the first time in years, humans and Zarnak agreed to open peace talks. A new role. Kel didn't return to hiding. He stepped forward as a voice for the unheard. For every species labeled as dangerous before being understood. For every prisoner with no one to speak for them. Mara stood at his side, not as a guard, but as a friend and a fighter for truth. Final scene. On a quiet moon, Kel stood before a crowd of thousands. Zarnak, human, and more. He raised his voice. "I was once just a name on an execution list. Now, I am a name in your hearts. Not because I'm perfect, but because someone saw who I really was. Let us build a galaxy where no voice is silenced again." He was ready to be executed, but one human set him free. Not just from prison, but from silence. The end